We have already learned how to track crashes and events, so over on App Center we get information about what is going on. Now, before learning how to distribute to the app stores, what I wanted to do is add a quick lecture on how you can also add a reaction if your app actually crashes. So what the crashes from App Center is going to do is actually know when your app actually crashes, like it stops working, it closes, and your users were left hanging. In here, we are actually predicting something wrong that may happen and tracking an error. But the crashes does a little bit more than that. And in fact, before doing that, there is also a good practice that we could do in here related to what we just did to track an event. So what I will do is create yet another private async void method that is going to be track error. And what it is going to do instead of tracking an event is track an error. And so what I will do is simply track the error like this. I will also, by the way, require the exception like this. So I'm just doing the same thing that I did with the track event, because over here, I want to evaluate again if crashing is enabled. So there is also an is-enabled async, just like we saw with the analytics. So again, just changing a little bit in here. But what I wanted to talk about is how you can react to crashes. So over here on the app class, when we are initializing the App Center, right after the App Center has been initialized, what we can do is evaluate if the application crashed. So I will create a boolean in here and evaluate and assign it to an evaluation. I will just call it did app crashed. And this is going to be equal to a call from crashes, which I already have the reference to, and called has crashed in last session async. So I will of course have to await this and make the onStart async. And so did app crashed, we already have information about whether the application in the last session crashed. So if the last session ended abruptly, leaving the user hanging. So perhaps here you could, if this is true, display an apology to the user or do something different to what your application would normally do, including maybe get a report about what happened. So in fact, let me go ahead and add an evaluation in here. If did app crashed is true, what I will do is get a crash report. And the crash report is also going to be available thanks to the crashes type. And what I will be able to do is get the last session crash report async. So related to the fact that the application crashed in the last session. And let me just await this. So my crash report variable type error report actually has that information. So let me add a couple of breakpoints in here to show you what this information is going to be about. So the first thing that I will do is over on the post page, return the throwing of the exception inside of the try block. So I will throw a new exception in here. And let me just add exception message right here when creating the exception. And again, this is happening on the creation of the post page. So what I will do is test this out, make the application throw the exception, then close the application and see if this is executed. So maybe you can imagine what is going to happen, but let me go ahead and test this. I will do it on iOS. By the way, immediately the breakpoint is hit, but did app crashed, of course, is false. The last session, this didn't occur. Let me go ahead and select one of these. We know that the exception is going to be thrown because, of course, we're also not seeing anything. So we know that the exception has been thrown. We know that we caught the exception and we are tracking the error. So let me go ahead and just stop this from running and run it again to see if the app crashed is going to be true. So here the application runs, the breakpoint hits again, and the app crashed is still false. Because of course our application did not crash. An exception was thrown, but we did catch that exception. So the application didn't really crash, there was an error, and we tracked it, but the application did not crash. So to test this out, how this is actually going to work, I will copy the code that is inside of the try block, and actually let me comment out this whole block of code and paste the code down here. So basically is the same thing, except now I'm not going to be catching the exception, which means that the application should crash. So let's go ahead and test this out. And again, of course, this is going to work exactly the same on Android. So here the app launches, we see that did app crash is still false, but let's go ahead and select one of these items. And now we're going to be throwing the exception, so our application is going to crash. We see that the execution over on Visual Studio has ended and my emulator seems to be all freezed up. So it probably means that my application crashed. Now, let me actually in the post page return the code to what it was before and run the application one more time. This time the application did crash, so let's see if did app crashed is actually going to be true. And if it is, let's see what crash report is going to hold. So here the app is launching. We're going to hit the breakpoint, and this time did app crashed is true. So we didn't have to do anything. The App Center package automatically was aware that this happened, and so this code is now going to be executed, which means that we're going to hit the other breakpoint, and crash report is going to have some information about what happened. We're going to see that Android details, it contains Android details. This is null because this happened on iOS. By the way, we see the error time, the start time, the device. We see information about the device. We see the exception that happened. So the exception message that we are actually sending when creating the new exception, where this happened, so the entire stack trace, and some details about iOS because this actually happened on iOS. So in runtime, or when the application returns after crashing, we can actually get some information about it, maybe tell the user about it, and then of course your application is just going to keep working as expected. But of course, things don't end right there. Let me actually navigate, get rid of these breakpoints and navigate over to App Center. And in App Center, we are on the iOS and we are on diagnostics crashes, and notice that we see information about that crash that happened a few minutes ago. So we don't have to track this crash. We don't have to do it as with errors. This is automatically logged to the crashes, to the diagnostics of our iOS application. And we of course see more information about what happened, where this happened. We can see the entire stack trace. We see the report of what happened in which device, after how long of the session. Notice that it happened 16 seconds after the session was started. And we see a bunch of information about what is happening, about what caused this crash. So as you can see, App Center is quite powerful, and it enables you to do much more than just distribute your application more easily. So I just wanted to add this lecture before diving deep into publishing to the app stores. But starting in the next lecture then, we're going to go ahead and publish first our Android application over to the Play Store.